What is the future of NATO? What role will it play in the future? Well, we're conservatives, so let's be good conservatives and take a look at history. Lord Ismay, the first Secretary General of NATO, famously asserted that the role of NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Our problem right now is clearly not how to keep the Germans down. If anything, we'd like them to stand up straight and actually start contributing to NATO. The German army currently consists of 3 divisions. The plans for expanding the Polish army envisages it consisting of 6 divisions. Given the population and the wealth of Germany, it seems quite silly for Germany to contribute less than 12 divisions to the defense of Europe, 4 times what it does today. This might sound like a lot, but let's compare it to the size of the army of West Germany alone during the Cold War. In the 1980s, the Bundeswehr consisted of 12 army divisions with 36 combat brigades, and it had more than 7,000 tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers. It had 1,000 combat aircraft and 18 surface-to-air missile battalions. A united and now much richer Germany can surely match that, if there is political will. Unfortunately, even though they've been talking about the Zeitenwende, that will is currently lacking. And I don't really know how we can change that. I'm open to any suggestions from you. So, what about the Russians? As far as I'm concerned, the job of NATO is the same now as it was then, to keep them out. Fortunately, this is not very hard, at least not in theory. The Russians are quite predictable. They respect strength, which for them means military strength, and they despise weakness. If you are weak and you live in the presence of Russia, then to them you are a walking provocation, essentially asking them to invade your country or intervene in it. But as long as you have a strong military and an effective counterintelligence service, and if you push back hard as soon as they start probing, then they'll go away for a while and will instead probe someone else. This leaves the Americans. How do we keep them in? Here we have 2 problems. The first is China. No matter if you talk to Republicans or to Democrats, one of the few things they agree on is the threat from China, which they see as a far greater long-term threat to their country than Russia is, something they are probably right about. This might seem like a somewhat alien perspective to Europeans. China is far away and is seen mostly as a trading partner, while Russia is not only close, but is also fighting a brutal war of aggression in our very backyard. But Russia has zero ability to challenge the US as the global hegemon, something China actually can. The second issue both Republicans and Democrats agree on is that Europe is freeloading on American defense spending. This is not a new thought. American presidents have said this for at least half a century. It is, unfortunately, also correct. European defense spending is still very low, even if it's rising, and even if most NATO members will soon achieve the 2% of GDP spending target, which should really be seen as a floor, not as a target. So, if Europeans want to keep the Americans in, this has got to change. As argued by Elbridge Colby, the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, it just does not make any sense that Europe should be defended primarily by Americans and only supported by Europeans. It has got to be the other way around. The main burden of defending Europe, especially on the ground, should be borne by Europeans, with the US playing the supporting role. It's really strange that this is seen as a radical view. Maybe it made sense when Europe was divided along the inter-German border, but today, in a free and ever more united Europe, it makes absolutely no sense at all. To sum up, To keep the Russians out, we need to spend more on defense. To keep the Americans in, we need to spend more on defense. And it would be very, very helpful if this increased defense spending effort is led by the Germans, who really need to stop hunkering down and finally start standing up straight. Oh, and as Donald Trump likes to say, it doesn't really make much sense for the US to help defend Europe if Europeans keep insisting on paying Russia billions for importing natural gas. Money which will in turn be spent on strengthening the Russian armed forces, which we're supposed to be defending ourselves against in the first place. That's it. Thank you for listening.